Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen. I wanted to pop in for just a couple minutes and answer well, really one particular reader question that has come up and does come up every so often. So wanted to pop in and give you some information. So that question is, how do you use the Word Study Toolkit? So if you're not sure what the Word Study Toolkit is, it is a downloadable ebook that I do offer via my website. And what it allows you to do is it gives you a massive set of lists and flashcards of a number of things to help build your students' orthographic and morphological awareness. So it includes things like prefixes, suffixes, roots and base words, and also some multiple meaning words. So what I'm going to do today, because I give you all of the tools that you need in order to study these things with your students, but sometimes people will ask me, okay, I have this resource, how do I use it and what do I do with it? So I wanted to walk you through a simple activity to get you started so that you know what to do when you are using this resource. So basically the goal is to give you a massive list of probes that you can study with your students, because we know that studying morphology has an impact on spelling, and we know that our students they need to be able to recognize those morphemes in words if they're going to be able to read those words that have multiple morphemes, which by third, fourth grade, they're expected to do. But we know that students are capable of studying this even as early as first or second grade, and that it can benefit them. And also, we know that we need to start laying that groundwork, even though they might not be expected to have full mastery of those skills just yet. So I wanted to, and I'm actually going to link to it right now. I did outline a while back, I outlined this really simple activity on my blog that just walks you through something that you can do with your students to study morphology that doesn't require a ton of gathering of materials, and also is something that the Word Study Toolkit was designed to do. So I'm going to just leave that in the comments below, so you can link to that article, and that'll just explain what I'm about to explain to you right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So what you actually need is just a couple simple things. So number one, a pencil and paper, a dry erase board or dry erase markers. You don't need both. You just need something to write with your students. Sometimes it's a little bit more fun to use dry erase markers. The students like it a little bit more, but really you just need something to write with. And then the other thing that you need is a list of prefixes and suffixes. And so you certainly could just do this with just a pencil and paper, but what I've done in the Word Study Toolkit is compiled all of that for you so that you can just grab this and be ready to go. So really the goal of this is to build awareness of these different prefixes and suffixes, and really just the pieces of the different words that will be coming up, really just the different morphemes that will commonly come up with in words that students are going to be reading and writing. And the point of that is we want them to recognize some of those spelling patterns. So that's number one. But the key also is just to build awareness that prefixes, suffixes, and those base words actually exist, because what's going to happen is that you're not going to be able to study all of these morphemes with your students. So just getting them aware and studying certain prefixes and suffixes can build that awareness. And what you want is for them to start looking for those pieces and those patterns in words. So just that awareness can have some carryover. So with that said, wanted to just go through the steps to this activity. So what you're going to do is, once you have all of your stuff, you are just going to pick either a prefix or a suffix. I always get asked, how do I know which ones to pick? There's not a magical hierarchy of, you've got to do them in this order, but I would say pick one that you think comes up a lot, like pre or re or un. So something that you think is going to come up often comes up in language a lot. It's probably going to come up in reading as well. So don't overthink that part. Just pick one and go with it. And what you're going to do, once you pick that prefix or suffix, what you're going to do is just start playing around with it with your students on either that pencil or paper or that dry erase board. So if you do re, you're just going to come up with a bunch of words that have that re prefix or suffix, and then you're also going to talk about what that prefix or suffix means. I recommend just going online. You could even Google it. There are a lot of good online dictionaries for this, and what you can do is just show your students how to look something up. You will notice that with a lot of these, especially with prefixes, they might mean something slightly different, but something that's semantically similar depending on the context. So, sometimes a prefix might mean one thing in one context, or it might mean something else in another context, but the two meanings are going to be semantically similar. So you're going to just look up what it means and then practice, just coming up with a lot of words. And then what you're going to do is once you come up with those words, you're going to look at those little parts in the words. And what you're going to do is you're going to think about what each individual part of that word means. So I would say for when you first begin, you could even dissect the entire word and look at what each individual morpheme means in that word. But I would pick, when you're first starting out, pick words that you think are going to be fairly familiar, or maybe you're just focusing on how that prefix would change the meaning of the word. So I kind of went into a bunch of different steps there, but wanted to kind of circle back around. So number one, you're going to use the prefixes and suffixes to come up with those words. So that's your step one. And then I've also kind of gotten into this. Step two is you're going to, once you come up with those words, you're going to talk about what those words mean. So that's step two. So step one, come up with the words. Step two, talk about what they mean. But when you're talking about what they mean, you're going to talk about what the parts mean. And then you're going to also talk about what the entire word means. So when you're talking about the parts, if you're just focusing on one prefix for that day, you might just really hone in on that. If you've been doing this activity for a while, you might talk about what each part of the word means as well. So once you get through that and you've talked about what those words mean that have whatever that morpheme is that you've picked, then you're going to just start playing around and practicing using those words. So that would mean that now that you've talked about what the word means, you might have them use them in sentences. You might talk about when you might do whatever that word is, or you might describe some certain situations that apply to that word. So whatever it is, you want to get your students to use those words, even if it's, maybe you're looking online, you're looking at pictures, and you're practicing coming up with sentences for those words, or whether you're just talking about a situation that has to do with those words. So those are your three steps there. So number one, just pick one of those prefixes or suffixes or one of those things that's in that word study toolkit. Number two, come up with a bunch of different words that have it and talk about what they mean. And then pick some of those words and start using them. Figure out how to get your students actually using those words. So those are the steps. It's pretty simple. That gives you kind of a starting point as far as how to use this resource if you've got questions. And actually what you can do here is there's even, once you get the hang of this activity specifically, what you can do is you can kind of start mixing and matching it. So maybe one day you're talking about prefixes, maybe the next day you're talking about the base, and then another day you're talking about the suffixes. And you'll find that you can also go the other way around. Once your students have done this a couple times, you might start with like tier 2 words list or something like that, and you might be able to pull some of those prefixes and suffixes out of those words as well. So that wraps it up. It's pretty simple. Basically, you're just picking the prefix or suffix, coming up with a bunch of different words, and then practice using those words. So if you've got any questions, feel free to send me a message at talktome@drkarenspeech.com, or you can simply just send me a direct message on Facebook and ask me, and I'll be sure to get back to you and let you know. So thank you so much for watching. I wanted to share with you, if you have the Word Study Toolkit and you're interested in really diving deep and getting a solid framework for not just morphology and orthography, but vocabulary overall, I do have a webinar that I am sharing that you can, it's playing all the time. You can go in, and every day there's a certain number of times that it's played. And what I talk about in this webinar is really that 5-component framework that you can use for your language therapy. So I will tell you that obviously 2 components of that framework that I do talk about on the webinar are orthography and morphology, but I also dive into the other ones. And I do mention one of my paid programs at the very end, where I dive into all of how to study morphology, and not just that, but the other areas of language as well. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to share that link to that registration page for that webinar in the comments as well. And so what that will do is it'll give you the framework for not just morphology and orthography, but really all of those components that you'll want to be hitting if you are doing language therapy for students who are in the school systems. So thank you so much for all of you who popped on today. I think it's Shelly. I'm not sure if, I know you had a question earlier, so looks like you popped on. I'm glad that you're able to get your questions answered. And I see Linda on as well, so thank you for popping on. So again, if you have any questions about the Word Study Toolkit, the blog post that I shared, where I talk about how to study morphology with your students, or the webinar that I just shared as well, feel free to send me a direct message on Facebook. So thank you so much, everybody, for popping in, and everybody have a great afternoon.